The 2009 Senate budget is a financial plan for Washington state that pins Washington values against budget realities. To understand the 2009-2011 budget, one must recognize the impact that the global recession has had on Washington state. As the economy has slowed and Wall Street has been devastated over the last year, Washington consumers are spending less money. Retail sales are plummeting across all sectors. These sales translate into a majority of Washington's total revenue sources. Over the last 2 years, this drop in retail sales has led to the loss of nearly $5 billion in revenue. Added to that are the costs of increased demands on the state's social services and education system. All told, the declining revenue and increased costs left Washington with a budget shortfall of $9 billion. If Washington was to continue with the previous budget of nearly $37 billion, you might think you could cut $9 billion out and the problem would be solved. On closer inspection, the problem becomes much more complicated. Of that $37 billion budget, nearly half of that is uncuttable, money for basic education and corrections, among others. So then what's left is the half of the budget that you could cut from, including all of the state's higher education system, the social safety net, and other healthcare programs. Washington does have several resources available to help with the shortfall. In 2007, voters created the Rainy Day Fund, and the Senate budget enlists the $700 million in that fund to help balance this budget. Earlier this year, the legislature passed a series of early budget savings bills that, among other actions, banned travel and purchases and instituted a statewide hiring freeze, saving over $700 million. Additionally, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act provided over $3 billion in stimulus money to Washington that helps patch this fiscal hole. But despite all these resources, the declining revenue and increased costs still leave a nearly $4 billion shortfall, which must be solved with program cuts. The $3.8 billion of cuts in the Senate budget can be broken down into four major areas: education, healthcare, the social safety net, and cutting government costs. Schools across Washington state will feel the impact of the cuts not only at administrative levels, but in the classroom as well. The budget suspends voter-approved initiatives that provided for teacher pay raises and funded smaller classroom sizes. These cuts will directly impact over 55,000 teachers and over 1 million students across Washington. Washington's universities and colleges will also see dramatic cuts. Through enrollment cuts and funding reductions, there will be 10,000 fewer students in Washington's colleges next year. The Senate budget also calls for reductions in health care programs across Washington. One of the biggest cuts is to the basic health program. 45,000 middle-class individuals will be removed from basic health. Along with basic health, child vaccination programs will be hit severely by budget cuts as well. All of these cuts will impact the nearly 1 million people in Washington state that receive some form of publicly purchased health care. Families and individuals across Washington depend on the social safety net to help get by, and in some cases, depend on these programs to stay alive. One of the most crucial programs is the General Assistance Unemployable, or GAU. The program provides medical benefits for those with physical and mental disabilities that are unable to work. In the Senate budget, this program is cut by 50%. Adult day health will face substantial cutbacks, and community mental health services will be cut by 7%. Senate budget also closes the McNeil Island Prison, the Green Hill School, and the Yakima Valley School juvenile detention centers. In a time of economic crisis, the state must continue to manage taxpayer dollars wisely. The budget makes unprecedented cuts in services, but also takes unprecedented steps to make government lighter and leaner. These cuts will lead to over 7,000 state jobs being eliminated. Remaining employees and teachers will have their salaries frozen, and many employees will face higher health care costs. Making government leaner includes trying new performance-based contracts for child welfare services, as well as selling the state patrol's passenger jet and contracting aviation services. All told, these cuts total nearly $4 billion. This also includes nearly $800 million left in the state's savings account in case the economy slips even further. Senator Lisa Brown and Senator Rodney Tom both know that the cuts in the budget endanger the values that they and their constituents hold dear.
We had to come to a balance point, and when you have a $9 billion deficit, it makes dramatic cuts in pretty much every major area. There's a lot of people. I came down here for education. It's making major cuts in K-12 education that are significantly going to affect our children's abilities to get the tools and necessary knowledge that we know they need in the future.
With a budget crisis this big, we couldn't avoid layoffs, and these are to people who provide public services across our state. They work in our state hospitals, they're teachers or university teaching assistants, or they do maintenance work for a state facility. And these are very painful cuts, and these job losses to the state workers are very troubling, unfortunately necessary in order to balance the budget.
When you make these cuts in healthcare, people don't all of a sudden get well. So how do we provide that next level of care, knowing that we can't give them the full meal deal, but we want to make sure that there's safety nets in place, and also we want to make sure that we're not increasing our cost structure in this difficult budget environment by sending them to the emergency room.
In our budget cuts, we anticipate that as many as 10,000 new places for students will not be available in the next 2 years. And consequently, it will take longer for students to get a degree, and there will be layoffs associated with that as well in our community colleges and universities.
Now, I personally think, having worked on this budget so deeply over the last 2.5 months, that when the citizens of Washington see the kind of cuts that we had to make in order to get to a balance point, they're going to say, that's not the values of Washington. Here in Washington, we want a great school system. We want to make sure there's that safety net for those citizens who are less fortunate than ourselves.